Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic by John Jackson Miller. But first, let me make this very, very clear. Each and every one of these issues, each and every one of these volumes is a banger. There's not a bad one in the bunch. But, unfortunately, something has to go at the bottom. And to start off our list, we are going to begin with the trade paperback for the miniseries War. In this particular miniseries, Zayne Carrick finds himself drafted into the Mandalorian Wars against his will, and he must get caught up in a scheme by a group of rogue Jedi, again, rogue Jedi and Zayne Carrick go hand in hand, that are determined to kidnap Padawans from the Jedi Order on Tatooine and train them up to be members of the Mandalorian Crusaders. This is a great storyline. It got tacked on at the end. The original series ended, and it had a very satisfying conclusion, but they decided they wanted to add a little bit more to it, and that was this miniseries, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic War. Again, it's a good story, but something had to go at the bottom, and that leaves this one at our number 10 spot. Following behind that is Star Wars Vector, which would be the 5th volume of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And the Vector storyline was actually a crossover event between the 4 major Star Wars series that were going on in the comics at the time, which was the Old Republic, Dark Times, Rebellion, and Legacy. And the idea was that all 4 of these eras were going to be drawn together in a kind of overarching narrative that spanned from 4,000 years before A New Hope to 150 years after the end of Return of the Jedi. This story arc was really compelling as far as the plot goes. You've got Celeste Morn, who is a member of the Jedi Covenant known as Jedi Shadow, which is a really cool concept, by the way. She is tasked with going out and securing dark side relics and doing everything that she can to prevent them from falling in the hands of anybody who could be a potential threat to the Republic or the Jedi Order itself. The members of the Jedi Covenant reach out to her and task her with hunting down Zayne Carrick and ending his life. It's a good storyline, but the thing that holds it back, in my opinion, is the artwork. The artwork just really didn't work for me. I didn't care for the faces and things like that, and it kept pulling me out of the story, which should have been really engaging. And again, it is pretty good, but the artwork holds this one back. Next up, we've got Volume 3 of Knights of the Old Republic, Days of Fear, Knights of Anger. That is 2 different story arcs. And of the 2 story arcs in this particular volume, I would say that the Knights of Anger is the weaker of the 2. Knights of Anger is kind of a spin-off story dealing with the 2 characters, Camper and Jarael, who are members of Zayne Carrick's team or found family. And Camper is suffering from an infirmity that is very similar to dementia, but he's brilliant. And Jarael decides that she is going to take him back to Arcania, where they are from, to get medical treatment. Unfortunately, they are what are referred to as offshoots, which are members of the species that were specially genetically modified for useful work in mines and things like that. They are not pureblood Arcanians. So they run into some prejudice and obstacles as they're trying to get him his care. Jarael winds up meeting with the head of Adaska Corps, and he takes quite a shine to her because she is something special when it comes to an offshoot. That storyline is fine, and it does set up some major events later on in the timeline, but it is not personally one of my favorites. The next in this series, The Days of Fear, I really enjoyed. That one involves Carth Onasi as an officer in the Republic Navy. You know him, and you love him from Knights of the Old Republic. Hey, if you've played that video game, tell me down in the comments, which way did you go? Did you go light side or dark side on your playthrough? Me, I'm always a light side guy. But anyway, getting back to this, Carth Onasi is working with the defense of Sokoru, I believe. And it's an odd story on paper. If I were to just tell you about it, you're going to say, this sounds really weird and it doesn't sound very compelling at all. But it's actually pretty good. Zayne and his partner in crime, Gryph, find themselves basically being the owners and operators of a food truck that supplies for the Republic Army. Yeah, it sounds really weird, and it sounds like something that would be un-Star Wars and uninteresting, but wow, does John Jackson Miller really make it into a story that's got a lot of emotional heft to it. I won't spoil what happens in the story for you, but just, you know, it is a great story arc. Do not skip out on it. Following that up, we move to the conclusion of the original comic book run with Knights of the Old Republic Demon. And in Knights of the Old Republic Demon, we finally find out what's going on with Jarael, because she's got a mysterious past that may or may not tie her to the Tales of the Jedi era Master Arca Geth, and she is struggling to fight back against the Crucible. She feels that she's been shunned by her friends on Zayne's crew, but it's a really fascinating conclusion to it. The Crucible, by the way, is an organization that the ancient Sith formed to help them provide troops for their slave armies. It is an organization that would bring people together for gladiatorial fights, and only the strong survive. Really good conclusion to the mainline series. It could have ended right there and been perfectly fine, but we do know that they went on with the miniseries War, which was also pretty good, but couldn't have just left it alone here. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic Volume 8 Destroyer continues the story arc building up to Demon, where Zayne and Jarael become more actively engaged in the pursuit of the Crucible. We find out in this particular story arc that Jarael was more than just a slave of the Crucible, but also a taskmaster, a foreman, so to speak, for the slaves. And Zayne goes through some pretty intense experiences as he tries to infiltrate the Crucible in this particular story arc, which leads to a division between him and Jarael, which sets up the endgame in Volume 9, Demon. Then we move on to Volume 7, Dueling Ambitions. This is the first story arc that picks up after the Jedi Covenant stories. This one introduces us to the Crucible and those gladiator fights, which are supposed to be toned down in the modern day, but still have high casualty rates involved with it. This one also includes a one-off story about a serial killer in space. I won't spoil that one for you, but I found it very compelling, very interesting. If you like The Running Man, the Dueling Ambitions kind of plays on the Arnold Schwarzenegger take of that story, and this is one that I found a lot of fun to read. Now we get into some of the best of the best. And we start with Knights of the Old Republic Volume 2, Flashpoint. This is foundational for all the major twists and revelations that happen further down in the series. We are introduced to a mad Mandalorian scientist by the name of Demigol, a rogue Mandalorian named Rohlan Dyre who flees from the battlefront not because he's a coward, but because he wants to know exactly what is driving the Mandalorians to do a galactic conquest now when they have been content to be nomadic in the past. Really good stuff in this particular story arc. We start to see the glimmers of who's going to become who in the Knights of the Old Republic video game. I won't spoil it, but just know that this is definitely an essential element to understanding the Jedi Covenant story arc, as well as the overarching story arc of the entire series. Now my top 4, I guess you would say. because Volume 4 also has two storylines in it. It has the Days of Hate and Nights of Suffering. Days of Hate is pretty good. It wraps up Camper's story and his engagement and interaction with the Daspa Corps. The Republic is working with Zayne, even though they want to kill him, to bring down Adaska, who is willing to sell a major game-changing weapon to either the Republic or the Mandalorians, or maybe he's just going to keep it for himself and make Arcanus the center of a new galactic empire. That's a pretty solid storyline, but the one that I really enjoy here is Nights of Suffering. Nights of Suffering is perhaps one of my favorite comic book arcs of all time, and that's including all comics. This is where we see Zayne go back to Terrace. He's finally going to engage with one of the main members of the Jedi Covenant who are responsible for framing him and murdering his friends. It is a fantastic story arc, not to be missed. So that leads us to our number 2 story arc, which is the first story arc of Knights of the Old Republic, Commencement. This introduces us to Zayne and all the significant characters that are going to be helping him along his quest. Camper, Jarael, Gryph, the con man, who's going to have a major role in shaping what kind of a Jedi Zayne becomes in the end. This is where we see the Jedi Covenant murder the Padawans, safe in the assumption that they are going to be the next Sith Lord. Prophecy, intrigue, betrayal, humor, it all begins right here in Volume 1. It is the perfect introduction to the entire series and the timeline. This is one that I really struggled not making the best arc out of the story, but it's really, really, really good. Don't sleep on it. Challenge me. I think Knights of the Old Republic is the best comic book series to come out of the mid-2000s. Now, some people will say it's Legacy, others will say that it's Dark Times, but I will die on the hill that it is Knights of the Old Republic. Which brings us to the best story arc in the entirety of Knights of the Old Republic. There are multiple different things that go along with this particular volume, but I'm just going to rank Volume 6, Vindication, as the best single volume of the series. Now, this is the culmination of the Jedi Covenant story arc. It has 2 parts, Exalted and the Vindication. The Exalted storyline in this particular volume deals with Zayne finally getting the evidence that he needs to prove his innocence. He takes on another one of the Jedi Masters that betrayed him, and it is just solid storytelling from beginning to end. Really gripping stuff. But the pinnacle, the absolute best, is the Vindicated storyline. That is where Zayne finally confronts the Covenant in their home on Coruscant. We are given the final revelation of what took place on that rogue moon where the Jedi Masters got their vision. We see who the actual villain of the entire series so far has been. This is a page-turner. It ties back to not only the history of Tales of the Jedi, but also sets the foundation for the Knights of the Old Republic video games. This is peak Star Wars comic book storytelling. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you the next time. Bye.